I'm 29. I've been a weed smoker for the past year. The first time I got high was off a 10 milligrams THC edible. I had a blast. I continued to do so, which turned into smoking, then turned into chasing that first high I had, as I'm sure we all did when we first started smoking. As I'm researching the best weed to buy, I'm watching YouTube. I stumbled across Joe Rogan's video with Wiz Khalifa talking about shrooms. I immediately became fascinated in them. This one video turned into months and months of research and eventually having my first trip. I won't bore you with the trip story. I'll just say it wasn't good. A factor was having friends with me that didn't know I was tripping. Here's the thing. I haven't been able to openly talk to a lot of people about my desire to try these medicines. It's the main reason I made a Reddit account. Being a black male amongst majority other black people talking about mushrooms, LSD, DMT, MDMA makes me look like a weirdo. I find myself trying to convince my friends that psychedelics are medicines that can be beneficial to your life when used correctly. Crazy thing is, I don't try to talk them into taking them. It's just nice to talk to people about your interest. You know, when I do bring it up, I'm met with, that's that white PPL crap. You'll end up crazy. You'll turn into a crackhead. It's very effing frustrating and ignorant of them. This has also made it difficult to even find avenues to even get psychedelics. I asked my weed man and he laughed at me and said he don't F with white people crap. I know I could grow my own shrooms, but I can't grow LSD, LOL. I hate it. I'm not racist at all. None of my friends are. It's just the world is so blinded. Ugh. My first trip was filled with anxiety, fear, and panic because, like the idiot I am, I invited my friends to hang with me while I tripped for the first time. I didn't tell them I was. I was in fear they would harass me, and my trip still ended up being 4 hours of being uncomfortable. I have used almost every drug the government tells us not to. And all I can say is that my life, all 30 years of it, have been one hell of a discovery. My relationship with mind-altering substances began at 15, and I have no intention on stopping now. Note, I started at 15 not because I had not been talked to about drugs as the government likes to advertise, but because I had been lied to about everything else they said, and because I was suspicious of the DARE officer back when it first started, and thought drugs were no different. For the most part, I was right. That being said, I have abused, as they like to call it, almost every drug that works, if you know what I mean. I had fun doing it, and I was damn careful not to OD or otherwise damage myself. I quit doing all drugs for a few years to serve my country. Big mistake. When they were through with me, I was broken mentally and physically. I was a sad wreck. What had happened to the responsible, carefree, drug-using person I used to be? So I started smoking cannabis again. That helped, but I still had real problems relating to service. I went to get help, as they like to say. I have been using Ativan for over a year now. I get 90 a month and take 3 a day. I was told by my doc that this was the gold standard of benzodiazepines. I thought, cool, this is enough to get me effed up for 1 week a month. Little did I know that I would end up taking these as prescribed. They have changed my life, and I could not imagine not having access to them. I hesitate to sound like I am addicted to these. I feel no withdrawal whatsoever if I dropped a half dose and then stop for a while, for finals and crap. The morphine, I am sad to say, is the opposite. I hate running out of that crap, but that and the Percocet is the only thing that has worked now that I have constant pain due to skeletal damage. Upon noble dosage with 1 mg, meaning not other medication, one can expect a calm feeling within 10 to 15 minutes, but it lasts most of the day. For faster results, place the pill under the tongue and let it dissolve. Has no taste, unlike the numbing sweetness of Valium or the chemical taste of Xanax. The effects of lorazepam are somewhat subdued when compared to fast-acting benzos such as the aforementioned. However, dose doubling has far stronger effect in the long run. I have used more than I was supposed to, of course, primarily because the doctor said that some days it was okay to take 2 and then others take 3. I like having latitude with my dosing, and I like having a doctor that understands that, so on bad days I may take 4 at once, very rarely though, and that is enough to calm my rage and discontent. It also makes that damn ringing stop. Without Ativan, I hear the sound on the movie The Ring right before someone dies, but constantly. With Ativan, I hear it, but it is reduced to the background. Alcohol has a significant effect on Ativan. It makes it somewhat stronger, but also makes the user very tired. Me, anyway. I would be careful about drinking too much while on it. I refrain from getting drunk, though. Morphine and other opiates are somewhat potentiated on Ativan, although for me it is hard to tell anymore. Cannabis seems to work very well with just about anything, but benzos in particular. They potentiate each other to some degree, but do not occlude one another. Each substance clearly has independent effects. Why is that the people who never use drugs regulate them so viciously? I will tell you my opinion. Historically, bigots, racists, politicians, corporations, and in general all slave owners have relucted to place one of experience and knowledge into a posture where said experience and knowledge would be beneficial. This is, I think, because of the colonial mindset that dictates that if item A can be used to control population B, then no member of population B can ever regulate item A. My proof, any D-head mother for like a US drug czar that tells people not to ever use drugs no matter what because they will ruin your life and has never used drugs cannot possibly know that, and therefore always argues from the straw man fallacy. Sure, there are people F it up on drugs, but those are the only ones anyone ever hears about. Can we the people report successful lives on drugs without fear of reprisal from our freedom-loving, liberating government? Hell no. And hence, this is not a democracy, but rather a despot regime in which all behavior not congruent with their political, narrow mindset is suspect and therefore subject to full penalties of law. But that is a different story. I can speak from experience. I have a 3.6 GPA and get high, as you call it, every day, all day, and I take very difficult classes. Bush failed effing political science, supposedly straight as an arrow. Tell me, how can one fail that and be president? Although the author of this document is not a med school graduate, his sources are. I got this information mostly from respected PhDs. Just because I'm young does not mean that this document is not the truth. As Bob Dylan once said, you people over 21 should know better. This document is written to spread the truth about supplements or drugs. It is very hard to find the truth about drugs because organizations such as Pride, DARE, Partnership for a Drug, Free America, and others are lying to children as we speak. Myth. The sleepy-looking eyes from cannabis, marijuana as they called it, are a harmful effect. Fact. Actually, the bloodshot and droopy eyes occur when the pressure in the eyes is lowered. Glaucoma is a disease caused by too much pressure in the eyes, causing extreme pain and even blindness. The way it makes your eyes look sleepy is a medicinal purpose, not a harmful effect. Myth. Cannabis today is 10-20, 30 times potent now than it was in the 60s, thus making it more harmful. Fact. Cannabis potency has changed very little over the millenniums. And if it's extremely potent, users will only have to use a small amount to get the desired effect, high. Therefore, it damages the lungs less. Myth. Cannabis harms the lungs more than tobacco. Fact. It is true that one joint, cannabis cigarette, is more harmful than one tobacco cigarette. However, most cigarette companies lace their cigarettes with acetone, the main ingredient in many nail polish removers, arsenic, rat poison, which can also kill humans if enough is taken, cyanide, an extremely deadly poison used to commit suicide, and other poisons. One drop of liquid nicotine is enough to kill the average human, and nicotine is addictive. Cannabis contains absolutely no nicotine, and many cigarette smokers smoke 20 or more cigarettes a day, sometimes ever 5 packs, 100 cigarettes, while less than 1% of cannabis smokers smoke cannabis every day. Myth. Cannabis is a drug. Fact. Cannabis is an herbal supplement. Myth. Cannabis causes a significant amount of damage on brainwaves. Fact. The answer comes from writing by an anonymous author. Rehabilitation clinics capitalize on drug horror stories. They cite worst-case scenarios as the norm. They provide unsubstantiated information about drugs shown to be harmless when used in moderation. These clinics have provided a means of depriving certain individuals, such as teenagers, of their basic rights. The Partnership for a Drug-Free America has even gone so far as to fabricate information to scare the public. The most glaring example of this was the famous brainwaves ad. This ad started with the statement, "This is the brainwave of a normal 14-year-old," showing an electroencephalogram indicating an active brain. Immediately following this was a nearly flat EEG readout, coupled with the statement, This is the brainwave of a 14-year-old who smokes marijuana. In fact, the second brainwave pattern was taken from a man who was in an accident-induced coma. High Times, 1989. Get the message is their catchphrase. The message is clear. Our government can find no concrete evidence of significant harms stemming from the use of marijuana, so they scare the public with lies. In fact, no reliable studies have demonstrated any significant harms from smoking marijuana. Brecker, 1990. Myth: only adults, not children or preteens or teens, can be responsible about consuming cannabis. Fact: the normal L have their heads up their butts. I know plenty of teenagers, some preteens, and some children who are responsible about cannabis use. The normal are being ageist by saying that, and their ageism is just as prejudiced as the racism that got cannabis illegal. Myth: cannabis was illegalized for valid or rational reasons or for our own good. Fact: cannabis was illegalized because of campaigning through the tabloids by racists who wanted it illegal to oppress and discriminate Mexicans and African Americans. It all started in the early 1900s, or possibly the late 1800s. Immigrants from China arrived and were, of course, hated. Many Americans hated them. The Chinese brought opium, a very addictive drug, with them, for it was an important part of Chinese culture. Opium numbs the mind, so users are more able to concentrate on boring sweatshop work. Because of this, racists all over said that opium was helping the Chinese steal jobs from Americans. It was illegalized in many local areas. The next drug to illegalized was cocaine, the third most addictive, harmful drug, just below crack and heroin, which comes from opium. And this time the discrimination was aimed at African Americans. The tabloids spread around propaganda comparing cocaine-induced blacks to savage beasts. They said that cocaine made one single black man as strong as 5 policemen. Cocaine was outlawed in numerous areas. In 1906, opium and cocaine were illegalized nationally except for medical purposes. The next drug to get it was alcohol. In 1920, prohibition began. Based on prejudiced Puritan mentality, the laws were passed, making hard liquor easier to get than beer or wine. Then, during the 1920s, cannabis was attacked. Black jazz musicians smoked it, as did Mexican soldiers. So the racists had a field day spreading lies. They named it marijuana, a Spanish word to make the Mexicans look bad. Marijuana assassin of youth and marijuana makes of boys in 30 days were common headlines in tabloids. They associated cannabis used with death. Despite that, no one has ever died from it. They said that cannabis was injected and showed pictures of needles to make it seem painful to use. By 1937, Teddy Roosevelt passed the Marijuana Tax Act. The act made it illegal. Myth: it is unknown whether or not cannabis is physically addictive. Fact: it has been proven that cannabis is not physically addictive. Fact: this one from Paul Hager. 10. Marijuana lingers in the body like DDT. This is also true but misleading. Cannabinoids are fat-soluble, as are innumerable nutrients, and yes, some poisons like DDT. For example, the essential nutrient, vitamin A, is fat-soluble, but one never hears people who favor marijuana prohibition making this comparison. Fact: this one from Paul Hager. 11. There are over 1,000 chemicals in marijuana smoke again. True, but misleading. The 31st of August 1990 issue of the magazine Science notes that of the over 800 volatile chemicals present in roasted coffee, only 21 have actually been tested on animals, and 16 of these cause cancer in rodents. Yet coffee remains legal and is generally considered fairly safe. I would also like to note that rat poison, arsenic, which is in cigarettes, contains only 30 chemicals. However, rat poison has killed, while cannabis has not. Myth: cannabis is only used because it is illegal, therefore users are just rebels trying to be cool. Fact: cannabis has been for thousands of years. It was used in BC. It being illegal has nothing to do with its use. Myth: cannabis makes people violent. Fact: cannabis makes people peacefully calm, mellow, euphoric, relaxed, and too intoxicated to seriously think about being violent. Despite this, stories of axe murderers being high and killing were popular tabloid stories in the 1920s to 30s, causing it to be made illegal. Lies got cannabis illegal. Myth: cannabis is a more harmful than alcohol, caffeine, aspirin, tobacco, and other legal drug. Fact: legal drugs kill millions of people a year, while cannabis has never killed anyone. Myth: cannabis is a gateway drug that leads to hard drugs like heroin, cocaine, and crack. Fact, the vast majority of cannabis users see hard drugs such as heroin and cocaine as addictive, deadly, harmful, and stupid. Most of them have never used hard drugs. When I first began to investigate psychedelic research chemicals, I rather quickly filed away 4-HO-DT and its acetate ester into a lesser category of drugs, perhaps something of interest only to the most dedicated psychonauts or molecule collectors. Among the first comments I read about 4-HO and 4-HO-DT were complaints that it was prone to disturbing bodily tremors and a negative mood, so without further ado I decided that it wasn't worth my while and moved on. Until, that is, my friend A, whose history with research chemicals is far more decorated than mine, gave 4-HO-DED as her top recommendation for psychedelic drugs that may interest me based on my preferences. With rekindled curiosity, I began to research it and became all the more fascinated as I uncovered the relatively rich history of this particular 4-substituted tryptamine. So I purchased a sample for myself, selecting the acetate for an apples-to-apples comparison to 4-ACO-DMT, which I've taken many times. Previously, among the 4 substituted tryptamines, I had taken the DMT, MeT, MIPT, EPT, and DPT variants. I started with 8 milligrams of the fumarate orally. At first, this resulted in a fairly unremarkable generic tryptamine buzz that fell somewhere between 4-HO-MET and 4-HO-DPT. But as the night wore on, I found that I enjoyed socializing with what seemed to be an enhanced sensitivity to the interpersonal dynamics surrounding me. Countless little insecure affectations, such as forced chuckles, bespeckled the conversation like so many particles of dust on an old, crackling vinyl record, which I observed equally in myself as others. Something about all of this was powerfully reminiscent of LSD, in a way that I've never observed in any other research chemical. I wondered, could the structural similarity between 4-hydroxy*diethyl*tryptamine and lysergic acid *diethyl*amide have anything to do with the subjective similarity? I flipped open my laptop to compare the two molecules. I've never been terribly interested in chemistry, but in this condition I was mesmerized. I must have spent a good half hour utterly lost in the 3D ball and stick models of these psychedelic molecules. I tried to develop an intuitive sense of how each of the atoms bonded with one another, attempting to somehow visualize the electrons and protons interacting with each other, as if I had shrunk down to the size of an atom myself. Intellectually invigorated by the experiment, I couldn't resist taking another 4 milligrams the next day in an attempt to recapture the nootropic-esque stimulation I experienced the night before. I went to the gym and worked out during the first phase, which was again rather ho-hum and was accompanied by some unpleasant bodily tension, elevated pulse, and a twinge of nausea. But when I came home and got in the shower, a switch suddenly flipped. I became convinced that none of these symptoms were in any way caused by the drug, but were only manifest by a state of heightened sensory awareness. The bodily tension was from straining myself at work, the elevated pulse was pre-existing stress, and the nausea was perhaps a dietary issue. I was only now made conscious of these things. I had previously accused the drug itself of having a dirty body load, but my perception was instantly inverted, and the drug took on a character of immaculate purity, as a crystal-clear window into the unconscious. I was propelled into an energetic hypomania, and my mind began to race along a series of tangentially related ideas. Through a system of interwoven thoughts about subjects ranging from a recent conversation with a friend to the symbolic resurrection of Christ, I developed an increasingly vivid conception of my inmost self as being something totally abstract, intangible, and outside the bounds of time and space. I wondered if pronouns like you and I refer to merely imaginary entities, and all that exist in reality are heaps of flesh and bone, with nothing concrete to which these words can point. The comparison to LSD bears repeating here. One of the most striking takeaways I got from Stanislav Grof's LSD psychotherapy was the incredible absence of any intrinsic character to be found in the drug. Grof was hard-pressed to come up with a single, consistent effect of LSD, even such seemingly ubiquitous phenomena as visual hallucinations or pupil dilation were occasionally absent in high-dose sessions. I get the sense that 4-ACODET shares that mysterious quality of formless invisibility, a sterile white light to illumine whatever comes underneath it, such as what you might find in a laboratory or a dentist's office. By the time I got home, I was more or less peaking. Considering how far I was able to get on 4 milligrams alone, I expected 16 to blow me to Jupiter. But the dose-response curve was gentler than I anticipated. I put on some down-tempo electronic music and closed my eyes. Unfortunately, I wasn't quite high enough to get any overt closed-eye visuals, but nonetheless, I perceived a dimension of space behind my eyelids which didn't replace my real environment, but rather existed simultaneously as a parallel inner world. Unlike 4-ACO-DMT, which I'd say creates the impression of being enclosed in a dark interior space like a cave, or perhaps underneath the canopy of a dense forest, 4-ACODET's internal space felt expansive, airy, and brightly lit. With my eyes closed, I felt as if I were a graceful hawk, soaring high above the mountains in a cloudless sky. On 4-ACO-DMT, music can sound very internal, hardly discernible from my own imagination. By contrast, on 4-ACO-DET, the music sounded hyper-real, as if booming over the vast distances of this landscape, reverberating off the mountainsides into infinity. This was the final nail in the coffin for me to become unequivocally convinced that 4-ACO-DT had a special overlap with LSD that most other tryptamines did not. My choice of music, however, wasn't thrilling me, so I found a video of Christian McBride's jazz trio performing on YouTube, which thankfully was brilliant. I saw the dark color of their skin and considered that they might be mistreated for this simple fact alone by some people, despite being masters of their craft, gods among men. Suddenly, I was overcome with conviction that my previous notion of racism, and indeed any sort of prejudice, was based on a myth. I felt for the first time as if there were no essential conflict between the oppressors and the oppressed, despite sometimes playing out in bloody violence on the surface. That, should the person on the handle of the blade peer deeply enough into the bottom of their heart, they would feel nothing but love for the adversary. And likewise, should the person on the edge of the blade truly know their deepest desire, they would willingly submit to death. I tried explaining this via text message to A, but I quickly realized that this was virtually impossible, so I gave up. Through the whole experience, I maintained an unusually cool, detached attitude. There was zero fear, but perhaps even more surprisingly, there was no great astonishment or ecstatic rapture. I held roughly the same euthymic mood that I would have had I not taken the 4-ACO-DT, and with good reason. Sure, I made some new discoveries about the drug, and had some fun thoughts in the realm of philosophy and spirituality, but really, it was just another day, another adventure. Possibly the most disturbing aspect of psychedelic drugs to me is their unrelenting insistence that each trip is more impressive and life-changing than the last, a new pinnacle of pinnacles. This often leads me to feel let down after sobering up, and realizing that I did not in fact finally achieve everlasting enlightenment, so while those manic extremes can be a whole lot of fun, I was actually quite relieved to have found a psychedelic that is humble in its presentation, yet equally powerful to the mightiest psychedelics in its ability to inspire radical, cosmic thoughts. So far, I conclude that A was right on target in her recommendation of 4-XDT, as it has quickly ascended to the top of my favorite 4 substituted tryptamines. And if it proves to scale well into higher dosages, it might even threaten LSD as my #1 favorite psychedelic, period. The only other tryptamine that I can imagine might surpass it would be 4-HO-MPT, but I haven't gotten the chance to try that one yet. I experienced no muscular tremors, nor any negative mood, so my initial concerns have been more or less allayed. I rarely feel comfortable taking a 4-substituted tryptamine past about 20 milligrams these days, but I'm really excited to try 4-ACO-DT at 24 milligrams. Until then, stay curious. Setting: I live in a middle-class suburban community that was built around what I would classify as wetlands. The whole community is engulfed in these muddy, dense forests that are usually quite hard to walk through. So I would venture to say the vast majority of the hot soccer moms and tool bag dads that inhabit the suburbs do anything other than ignore these swampy forests. Most of my trip occurred in or around these unexplored forests. Mindset: calm, but with a sprinkle of excitement. My trip buddy bailed out at the last second because he had to do some volunteer work. So I did have some apprehension about the safety aspect of tripping alone, since I was adventuring into the vastly unexplored area of a research chemical. I've also never tripped on RCs, let alone 25I, but I eventually assured myself that I had done my homework on the drug and I could definitely handle it. Dose, I took 2 hits, sublingually, of 25IN bomb. The hits were advertised to have 1 mg each, but my friend said someone measured them out to only have about 500 micrograms, so I would roughly estimate that I ingested 1 milligram of 25I. I'm a 160 lb male and I have not tripped in at least 3 or 4 months, so it is fair to say there was no tolerance to interfere with the substance. My dogs were pretty instrumental in my trip, and they are the only people in my trip since I was tripping alone. I think it might be helpful to describe both of them and their personalities. The oldest dog, Gunner, is the stereotypical hunting dog. His loyalty, adventuresome attitude, and downright badassness let me really connect with him. He is a 5-year-old brown terrier Labrador pit bull mix. My other dog, Puppy, is the F-up. Bought off of Craigslist for $30 when he was 4 weeks old, the dog has some pretty decent mental issues. I've convinced myself he is schizophrenic. With his rapid movements, nonlinear thinking, and the fact that he cannot learn basic commands, he gets me very irritated sometimes. And this makes him unsuitable for nice strolls in the neighborhood. The reason his name is Puppy is because the only other name the family agreed upon is Boner. My stepmom got this name from combining our previous dog's name, Bogey, with our recent dog's name, Gunner, to get the name Boner. But since chasing him down the street screaming Boner or telling the veterinarian that your cute puppy's name is Boner can be quite embarrassing sometimes, we now refer to him as Puppy. Puppy is a white pit bull. I put the 2 blotters in my upper lip at 10 a.m. I did not swallow for 30 minutes and kept the blotters in my mouth for the duration of the day. I tried to set up all the trip toys in my room, but the backlights and lasers seemed emasculated by the bright sunshine blasting into my room through the cracks of my blinds. I still turned on all the lava lamps and the electroplasm lamp along with my choice of music, which was my newly created Trip playlist. I then proceeded to jump onto my beanbag and be lulled by the gentle ambiance of the American Dollar, the band. I, having some attention issues, got up pretty quickly and realized I needed something to eat before I got dead in the center of my trip, so at 1 o'clock, I decided that I needed to go to McDonald's before it hit me. I know it is super dangerous to drive while tripping. It's idiotic and I'm endangering other people, but just like all good suburbs, the McDonald's is in the middle of the community and was literally a 60-second drive, which I made it there safely, only noticing a slight euphoria and general happiness from the drug. I decided to go in because at this point I was craving human interaction, and I had convinced myself that if I needed a ride home, I could call someone to pick me up. My headspace was unbelievably sober, and when I walked inside the McDonald's, a wave euphoria and happiness washed over me, and the typical psychedelic reflective thoughts started bombarding my head. The first reflection I made was on the spoiled 4-year-old in a sparkly tutu, screaming at her mom that she wanted a big girl's meal, but she still wanted the pretty pony toy. It just amazed me how this 4-year-old girl could take control of this grown adult just by simply raising her squeaky voice at her. The mom succumbed to the tyke and tried to bargain with the manager for a kid's toy as I tried to look away in disgust. I pondered what society would be like if every child was raised like a spoiled brat. I got my 2 cheeseburgers and fries and for some reason rushed them down my throat. I experienced my first slight hallucination, which made the ketchup squirter seem farther away than it actually was. This was very mild, and since I was pretty much looking for hallucination, I quickly focused in and turned the hallucination off. I was so amazed about how much control I had over this trip. I experienced no notable taste differences in the food, but I was generally uncomfortable in my seat. I wanted to be outside. I wanted to explore. The euphoria had gotten to be fabulously intense, but I still felt almost sober in my headspace. The walk to the car brought to my attention how beautiful everything was, a word that would loop through my head the entire day. I called most of my friends, all of whom were busy or didn't pick up, so I dumbly took the wheel yet again and drove the 60 seconds to my house. When I got to my house, 1:45, I let my dogs out onto the patio and took a seat in a lawn chair. I quickly brought outside my laptop and played M83's Dead Cities, Red Seas, and Lost Ghosts as I observed Boner and his antics around my pool. The music sounded unusually inspiring as I pondered some of the things Puppy was doing. Puppy viciously chased after a lizard, and after a slight jump, he came down upon the lizard, tearing it apart with the tools evolution had provided him for doing so. I pondered why there seemed to be so much interspecies hate. I knew the dog was probably not aware of our human concepts, such as kindness, but it started to get me thinking about why racism seemed to be a natural thing. For the sake of brevity, I won't go into too much detail about my thoughts, but they were relatively deep, and I experienced absolutely no thought loops. I moved from thought to thought as my dog went from situation to situation. The backdrop of the forest behind my patio harbored some of the more moderate hallucinations, including the leaves bursting into fractals, limbs slightly moving and wavering, and a general breathing of the forest. But these hallucinations were only there when I focused intently on seeing hallucinations. They were pretty much controllable, and my headspace was clear as day. Pretty soon I got bored, and some of the euphoria had converted to energy. I started getting fidgety, which made me uncomfortable, so I got out of my seat and decided to take my other dog, Gunner, on a walk. T230. To get to our destination, the park, we had to walk through our sub-community. As we were walking, I realized it was probably the most beautiful day of the year. I couldn't have asked for a better temperature, cooler breeze, or more big puffy clouds. This thought sparked a sudden interest in the beauty around me. Even the man-made shrubbery that was implanted into the grounds around the stereotypical suburban houses seemed so breathtakingly beautiful. I would often find my face inches away from the different flowers and trees, just examining the beauty. Amazing, I kept muttering to myself as my impatient dog dragged me forward. We got out of our neighborhood, crossed the street, and almost immediately after, I saw something that quite literally made my jaw drop. There was a perfectly formed tunnel of short, skinny trees, with their branches sewn together to make the perfect canopy. Even better was the fact that this tunnel led to a beautiful, seemingly undiscovered lake in the middle of a muddy forest. Completely blown away by my luck, but sort of apprehensive because I would have to do some sort of a hybrid between a crouch and a crawl through this small tunnel I trekked through. To my great surprise, the ground was not nearly as wet as it usually is, probably because of the lack of rain. I took Gunner off the leash and he followed me through the tunnel as I took down the 2 or 3 spider webs that lay in our path. As soon as I stood up, a tsunami of euphoria, happiness, and just pure breathtaking amazement came over me. I had found the most beautiful amber lake, totally undeveloped, surrounded by trees and filled with wildlife. Gunner joyfully jumped in and started to chase the numerous bass the water as I gazed upon the twinkling lake, overstimulated by what I had discovered. The annoying buzz of the suburban lawnmowers mowing the median started while I was staring at the lake, and it persisted for quite some time. I took my phone out to take a picture and check the time, 3 o'clock. But as soon as I took my eyes of the lake, the buzzing seemed to get closer and closer. I soon convinced myself that the reason that tunnel was there was because they were clearing this section of the forest out to make another suburb. I even briefly convinced myself that I was going to have to do the stereotypical hippie standoff between the tree cutters and the tree huggers, and would have to plead with them not to exploit my newly discovered beauty. I called Gunner out of the water and scurried out of the tunnel, only to find that the buzzing getting closer was a mild auditory hallucination, and the lawnmowers were still mowing the medians. We made it to the park and quickly cut across some fields to get to the trail section. In the adventurous mood I was in, I decided to walk along a moderately large alley of grass that was carved through a huge forest instead of the trails. The reason the alley was made was for the construction and maintenance of the telephone lines that ran down this alley. It was not meant for nature walking, but it suited my adventurous cravings perfectly. As soon as I turned down the alley, I had another stroke of luck. A family of deer was maybe 200 yards away from us, and Gunner was too busy sniffing around to go chase after them. I slowly approached them with strong euphoria and racing thoughts. I started to kid with myself about how they might let me ride them around their forest, showing me the vast beauty of their home. But as I got closer and closer, I slowly started to believe I actually was going to get to ride one, or at the very least touch them. But as soon as I got within 100 yards, my dog barreled past me, chasing the deer back into the forest. Somewhat frustrated, I moved along. This is where I noticed a high-definition effect. As the beautiful monarch butterflies crossed over the alley, not only was there a moderate tracer effect, but I felt like I was seeing in high definition. As the white and black butterflies joined them, the HD effect made everything I saw seem so unexplainably beautiful. So much that I even started marveling at the industrious steel telephone poles. Soon enough, we reached a point that I wanted to venture off the alley. I picked a good point and started to take the first steps into the forest, but Gunner raced ahead. As I looked up, I heard the pitter-patter of animal steps and saw flashes of tan. But all of that soon disappeared as my dog chased the poor deer away for the second time. I decided to trek on, and as I looked down to check my feet, I see that every time my foot compressed, there must have been 10 or 15 spiders that came scurrying out. This was the first moment of paranoia I experienced, and I shouted quite a few obscene phrases as I leaped out of the forest. The spiders were not hallucinations, they were real, and as I dusted one off my left foot, I started to have doubts about this whole adventuring thing. But as I calmed down, the beauty of the forest took hold and hypnotized me into going on another adventure just on the other side of the Ally. Tilda T, 4 o'clock. This time I made it past the first few steps and actually got deep into this mud forest. Everything was so beautiful, from the nubs of roots that shot up from the ground, to the pitch black floor, to the way the light shone through to certain parts of the forest, to the moderate hallucinations of the spinning leaves and flowing bark. I was definitely still peaking. But soon enough I had another possibly scarier mishap. I was woken out of my trance by the squeal of Gunner as he rushed towards me, and as I quickly looked around, I see a long, approximately 4 feet, thick black snake darting towards the other end of the fallen tree I was standing on. I was scared crapless, trying to keep an eye on the ridiculously big serpent that had settled down on the tree I was standing on. Staring at me and Ganir, I entered into panic mode. Muttering the same expletives, I looked at my dog. I quickly checked him for any bite marks, as my serious concern for my dog's safety almost completely sobered me up. He was not bit, thank God. We both hurried out of the forest with only slight confusion about which way we came from. As soon as we caught sight of the Ally, I started to feel at peace, and the euphoria came slowly rushing back to me. I stayed in the Ally and watched my dog plunge in and out of ponds until we got to the end, which happened to end in a residential area. Gunner chased after some ducklings on a lake that was in someone's backyard, but we eventually turned around. At this point, approximately 4:30, I started to come down, but gently, and it was very prolonged. I decided that going on the walking trail was probably safer than going through more forests. So we walked down the Ally and went around a lake that happened to intersect with the walking trail. I walked around, still taken back by the amount of natural beauty I was engulfed in. I eventually made it home, and the euphoria didn't go away until about 8 o'clock, which was when I finally swallowed the blotters. When my sister got home, I was feeling very sociable, which is something I noticed on later trips with 25I. Although I have never tried 2CI or acid, the amount of trip reports I have read on these substances is ungodly, and I feel like I can fairly say my experience was nothing like either of the drugs. The crystal clear headspace I experience is unlike any other. The amount of control I have over my trip is also a fantastic perk. I feel as if I could never have a bad trip. The intense euphoria plasters a gaping grin onto my face, and everything around me seems so happy and beautiful that I would have to have an extreme dose paired with something extremely horrifying to have a bad trip. Of course, these analyses of this drug are purely my own, researched with only my body. I just wanted to do my part and report on the effects that I had while on 25 Ironbaum.
Like and subscribe.